The .NET Core podcast is supported by our listeners who have become patrons. To see a full list of the patrons, or to join them, head over to .NETCore.show/patrons. Hello everyone and welcome to the .NET Core podcast. A podcast where we reach into the core of the .NET technology stack and with the help of the .NET community present you with the information that you need in order to grok the many moving parts of one of the biggest cross-platform multi-application frameworks on the planet. I am your host, Jamie Caprogman-Taylor. In this episode I talked with Dan Clarke about developer productivity. As with the previous episodes of this show, episode 96 with Felina Hermans for instance, this episode is a slight departure from the usual subject. Productivity, knowledge sharing, and developer education are just some of the topics that Dan is very passionate about, and he wanted to share some of his knowledge and experience with us all. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcasts, and let the show begin. So, Dan, thank you ever so much for joining me on the show today. It's great to be connected with you.
Hey, Jamie, thanks for having me on the show. It's kind of weird being on the other side of the fence. My first time on someone else's podcast, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, it is. Well, it's exciting for me. I can't say how exciting it is for you, but it's definitely exciting for me. I actually started this in your position, so I was actually interviewed by a bunch of people and I was like, this is easy, just buy a microphone and get someone else to do it all. Yeah, that's not how it works.
Well, I find it kind of scary losing the power of editing, but then also kind of liberating at the same time. I know we're talking a lot about editing before we hit the record button, but yeah, it's quite time consuming too.
Yeah, it struck me the other day that my editor has something like 500 hours of my voice. So if he wants to use something like Descript, he could just throw all of that in there and just have it produce a whole bunch of sentences. For those who don't know, Descript is an app, I believe, by Adobe. You can give it some audio and it gives you a visual transcription, and you can chop and change it. You can move the words around and it will use, here come the bunny quotes, artificial intelligence to figure out what it would have sounded like if you would have actually said that, because you've given it all the training data, right? And so it then figures out what it would have sounded like. And so it's kind of scary to me that my editor has 400 hours plus of me saying all sorts of things.
So he's going to start his own podcast of you.
Yes. Oh, what an idea for a show, like a meta podcast, like the podcast about podcasting by podcasters.
Well, that can be your 100th episode you were just talking about before. So that can be...
Yeah, right? But the key thing being that they're saying things they never said. It's like a deep fake, but not. It's very scary.
I was actually listening to a podcast episode by the person that created it, and he was saying that you can't fake someone else's voice. I don't know how... Maybe your editor could, I don't know, because he has the keys to the kingdom to your account, I'm not sure.
That's it. I think it's all to do with the training data. So because it's got 400 plus hours of my voice, their model will know what I sound like. So that's really scary, actually. Anyway, let's not worry about that, because we're not here to talk about scary stuff. This is going to be another episode where we don't talk specifically about .NET, bit of a departure, but I think it's something that is an important topic. I mean, you'll have all seen it when you hit download. You know what we're going to talk about. But yeah, I thought it would be a good idea to have a chat about productivity and stuff like that, because I feel like it fits well with, as long as these go out in the right order, it fits well with the previous episode, which is like learning how we learn and sort of studying and retaining information, but also producing code in a way that other people can read and deeply sort of understand it really well without having to put too much sort of mental effort into it. But I guess before we get to any of that, Dan, I was wondering, would you mind introducing yourself to everyone?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a independent software developer working through my own company, Everstack. And I've been developing commercially for about 25 years. The first half was in the games industry doing C and C++. And that was mainly working on games engine stuff. So like graphics, audio, tooling and that kind of thing. And then the second half has been more focused on .NET. So both desktop and web development. And these past few years, quite a bit of Azure stuff too. And I also do quite a bit of mentoring and consulting. So I know we were talking about the whole consulting thing earlier. But fortunately, I still get to code every day, which is nice. And then out of work, I'm married with 2 amazing but way too energetic boys. And that's me pretty much.
Awesome. Yeah. If I had to stop coding for the rest of my life, I'd be rather upset at this point. There's a weird, I try to explain it to people and they don't quite get it. The only thing I can really come up with is it's similar to like an artist. If you give a painter a blank canvas and every single paint that they could ever use, they'll find a joy in painting something, right? They've gone from a blank canvas to something. Maybe it's some scenery, maybe it's a portrait of someone, maybe it's something more abstract. Whatever it is, they find a joy in creating that thing, right? And I find a joy from going from, I have literally, there is no file, there is no folder, there is nothing, it doesn't exist, to I've been sitting here for several hours and guess what, I've got a whole system running and there's bits flying everywhere, and this could bring someone either some entertainment, some joy, could make some money for someone, or I could just talk about how I've built it and it can teach other people how to build the stuff, right? And I feel like it's a little different from because some people talk about it similar to like woodworking or metal, like metallurgy, but I feel like with those you already have something and you're reducing from one set of things and it adding to another. So if you're woodworking, you're going to be cutting and lathing and sawing and planing and taking stuff away and then doing that to other bits and then putting those resultant bits together. So you've reduced something, then combined something. Whereas with coding, you're literally starting with, it's a bunch of electrons. You're starting from the barest possible collection of something and gluing them together, right? You're creating something completely new that at the same time doesn't really exist either. It's all crazy.
Yeah, I guess also on the flip side of that, you're also building on top of other people's abstractions, so I guess you're probably not starting at nothingness, and this is something we can talk about, actually leveraging stuff other people have done, like tooling, libraries, and not reinventing everything from the wheel. But one thing I could tell when you were talking then is the passion you have for software development. And that is so important. And I think mindset is something we should definitely cover, because when you're learning something, if you're not interested in it, then you're not going to remember it. But if you're passionate about it, if you want to learn it, you need to add emotion to learning. And that's how you remember stuff. It's so important. And surprisingly, it's something that you can actually choose to be passionate about something. It's weird how you can change your mindset quite easily.
Yeah, it is. The mindset and passion are so important, like you said, because if you're not like actively involved in it, if you aren't feeling the emotions of maybe the joy, the wonder, the whatever, then you aren't going to remember. And it's also going to be difficult for you to learn, because when you learn something, think back to when you had some of the best news of your life, right? You felt a certain way. When you remember that situation, when you remember that news that you were given, you feel those emotions. And so if you also, and I don't wish to stress upon this for anyone listening or for yourself or whatever, think back to a time when you were told something and it was really upsetting news. You still feel those emotions, and it works with news, with knowledge, with any kind of experience. And so if you're attacking something, let's say you're working on a legacy code base that uses jQuery. You've never touched jQuery before and you don't understand why it exists, and you're like, can't we just use Angular or React or Vue or some other more modern thing? You're coming at it with a bit of anger, a bit of resentment, a bit of fear, a little bit of, there's like the unknown. And unless you can deal with those emotions and put those to one side, you're going to feel that every time you're looking at the code base. You're going to feel that when you're trying to work on it. And so I feel like you're absolutely right. You need to have that joy, because when it gets hard to do, you'll fall straight into those emotional, I don't want to say pits, because I'm worried that I'm not trying to compare feeling anger and fear for a moment to any kind of long-term thing, but you will feel that anger, that hurt, that potentially embarrassment. You'll feel those negative emotions, and that may stop you from wanting to continue, right?
Yeah, I think also some of these negative emotions are very similar to positive emotions. So, for example, if you've got a big meeting or you're doing a talk or whatever it is, something you're nervous about, that nervousness and excitement are very similar emotions. So and it's not actually that hard to say, this energy I've got from my nerves, I'm going to turn into excitement. And it just changes the way, if it's a talk that's presented, but it's still using that same emotional energy.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I've done that myself, and I know that Scott Hanselman has mentioned a few times, because he's very open about the fact that he's rather diabetic, and he said a few times that he's tempted to wear a little camera so that you can see what he sees when he gives his talk, or indeed to take his blood sugar levels whilst he's doing his talk, because obviously the whatever energies and whatever emotions you're feeling will be having a physical effect on you as well. So if you're feeling nervous, you turn that into nervous energy, and you produce you then make it part of your I guess performance might be the right word, I'm not sure. That's going to take its toll on your energy levels. And he said in the past, I've been tempted 10 minutes in, 20 minutes in, an hour in, just to take my blood sugar, just so I could see what it is. Or to tell everyone, hey, look, I'm going to need to sit down for a moment, maybe have a drink or something. I'm not sure what you would do in that situation, because I feel like my blood sugar levels are coming down. Or maybe, I'm feeling a little tired because I've been up and excited and jumping around, So, yeah. It's interesting that I hadn't even thought about that, because that also fits into your developer productivity, because if you're having to teach someone, even if you're just sitting next to them, you're using that same energy you may be feeling as nervous or angry or upset or resentful, or hopefully you're not feeling negative things about sitting next to someone, but you know what I mean? It's like you could also be feeling those things too.
I think also with the whole negative thing, I think it's important, while we're on the topic of developer productivity, a lot of the stuff that we talk about today might sound like it's going to introduce extra stress. And we can certainly talk about why you might want to be more productive. But I think it's important that this increasing your productivity is more about reducing stress. It takes less time to do something. You don't need to work ridiculous days, like working into the evening, because you can do more in a day, and it's in a more relaxed manner. So, for example, if you've been, and I think we'll talk a lot about learning, although I think you said that would be a topic of your previous episode, but as you learn stuff over time and you know more stuff, then you get less imposter syndrome. So then that reduces stress. If you get to the end of the day and feel like you've accomplished a lot, then you feel you're less stressed and you feel less likely that you want to, or you have to, work into the evening. So all of this is about reducing stress, not increasing it. Like if you need to produce more by working longer hours, then there's a limit on that. There's only so many hours in the day. But so it's kind of like you can't get that much more productive by working, like doing more in a day. But by working smarter, you can do way more. So I think it's more about working smarter, being lazy by doing things like automating what you can. The more you know, the more you're going to go in the right direction in a short amount of time. And it's a combination of lots and lots of different things, which hopefully we can go through today. And all put together, it's just less stress. Everything's calm and relaxed. I think that's the idea.
Yeah, totally. I like something that you've mentioned a couple of things there, and there's one that I'm inferring, but and that's the first one I'm going to bring up, and that's be kind to yourself, right? It's so important to be kind to yourself, to allow yourself to go, right, okay, I don't quite get this now, but I will understand it later. Or indeed, hey, look at what I've achieved, right? This morning, I didn't know a thing about this, and look what I've just built. Right? That sort of reflection, being able to say, hey, let's take React, for example, right? This morning, I knew nothing about React. All right, I went through Create React App, but guess what? That's how you start to build a React app. And now I've got not only a couple of components, but they're styled. I've got a search function. I'm talking to the real API. I've got a bunch of tests in place. I mean, sometimes it's enough to just get to, okay, so I've used Create React app, because maybe you don't know how to get started. So you've gone to the React tutorials, you've ran through Create React app, right? I get it. I understand the component model. That's my day done. Whatever it is that you've achieved, accept that you've achieved it. It may not match up to what your expectations are, or what your expectations were when you started. But hey, look at what you've done. Look at what you've achieved. And allow that feeling in. Allow that positivity. Be kind to yourself.
Exactly. And I think it's important that everyone realizes there's no rush. So it's not like you need to learn all these technologies tomorrow and be super productive tomorrow and everything. It's just the whole concept of incrementally doing things. So just knowing that if I do a little bit of, say, active learning every day, it doesn't have to be a lot, but it's that consistency, that cadence, doing that little bit every day. How much, if I do that versus if I don't do that, how much more am I going to know in a year's time, in 5 years' time? It's just that, what's the word? Compound learning, that's the word I was thinking of. So it's almost like compound interest, where with compound interest, you're earning interest on your interest. So you've got this snowball effect. With learning, by just doing a bit every day, you're constantly building foundations, and you'll find that over time you'll learn more faster, and you'll find more complicated things easier because you've built that foundation. So it's just doing this incrementally. There's no rush, but it's just having that consistency.
Totally, yeah. There's a phrase that a very smart person once said to me, and that is, you can't build a house on sand. You need the foundations there. And she was talking specifically about exams and learning. And I feel like it fits, right? Without you will find it harder to leap straight into asynchronous programming in JavaScript if you haven't done any programming whatsoever. Like if your goal is, I want to learn asynchronous programming in JavaScript, in a specific language, in a specific framework, going directly to that very specific thing without going, right, what is JavaScript? How do I make JavaScript? What is a function? What is a variable? All the way up to, okay, so now, like you say, you're building on that prior knowledge, and it might be that you can go to another language and learn what a function is. The knowledge still applies, right?
Yeah, definitely. And with this whole learning thing, and this is a topic that I think we'll probably speak quite a lot about in this episode, is the concept of note-taking. And I think one takeaway from all of this would be, if you're not an avid note-taker, become one, because it makes such a big difference. And I think this applies to learning, and it applies to like code snippets. If you say you've done something, say maybe, I don't know, done some OAuth stuff and you've done some login or whatever it is with a current system, then you need to do it again 2 years later. Looking back at your succinct notes that you wrote in a way that you would understand, which you can just quickly remind yourself, or are you having to revisit Google, Stack Overflow, trying to work out all the different bits and bobs which weren't obvious? So it's a lot about like making notes so you can revisit your notes as you're learning, but also when you do stuff, not repeating yourself the next time you have to do it because you've taken notes. So I think note taking is quite an important thing. So everyone learns completely differently, and some people prefer Pluralsight courses, some people prefer books, but fundamentally memory works the same way, in that by recalling something you've learnt, that deepens your memory and helps your brain transfer it to long-term memory. And so regardless of how you learn, whether it's books, videos, podcasts or anything, by actively recalling, and a good one is doing that knowing that you're going to teach someone else. So when you teach someone else, you're learning it twice. But also note-taking. So if you've written the notes, by writing the notes, you're recalling again. And because you tend to write those notes a lot more succinctly. You're not duplicating the original content. It's just things that you don't know already that you want to remember. When you revisit that, that's an act of recalling it again. So I think note-taking has so many different benefits. I found that for me, going into clients and picking up their business, their code base, by just actively taking lots of notes and being quite intentional about it, that just makes such a big difference.
Absolutely. And it allows you to slow down your thought process. If you think of the brain as being similar to a computer, everyone has a different operating speed, right? You can only take so much information in. If I'm reading something and someone's talking to me, I can't do both because and I'm sure my friend Paul Seal's going to hate this, but I'm an auditory learner, so my brain switches from it's almost like I can't see. Right, my attention goes directly to the sound that's happening. So if I'm reading and I want to take something in, I know that I have to sit in either silence or sit with. I have a playlist of music that I put on that just drowns out. It just provides some like background noise, and I'm happy to sort of share the playlist if people are interested. So do get in touch. But that helps me to do that. But I know that because we all have our own operating speed, taking some time to stop and go, right, what did I just learn? What have I just taken in? I've taken in loads of information. What is the core nugget that I need? Like, let's say I'm learning OAuth, right? What's the core nugget that I need? Right, well, there are a bunch of well-known endpoints that I need to write, right? So I need to write well-known endpoints and underline that, right? Because that's a core concept. I don't need to write, OAuth is a security practice for authorizing and authenticating users, because it's not going to help me to implement it later, right? But I need to write down well-known because that's required.
Yeah, I really like with note-taking using indented bullet points. I find that's just a great way of doing it. So it kind of forces you to be succinct, but then you can nest them to just group things together. And I just find that works really, really well. And then the bullet points I would write are things that I know I want to remember, that I need to, like, I don't know intrinsically anyway. So I need to come back and revisit. And yeah, just having that in my, I think this is the problem with, so maybe this is a bit of a controversial thing, but if you're writing notes within a team, you kind of want to put those notes in some shared wiki or something. And so you should definitely do that because, like, sharing knowledge and everything. But I think you should also have your own personal notes, because there's lots of friction to writing shared notes where multiple people can collaborate, because you're not writing it for yourself. My notes for myself would be written completely differently than when I'm writing documentation on a wiki for other people. That I can imply lots of knowledge and stuff. So I would say, like, obviously, share knowledge, help your team, put things on the wiki, but also have your own notes as well, which is your second brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's lots to be said about that, and I think you're right. It is important to have a separation, because then you can use your own metaphors, your own knowledge, your own background, and you can say, right, I don't need to write React as a JavaScript library and it uses Node and the npm system, because I know that. But if I'm writing it for and I also feel like you should have like a target reader in mind. If you're making notes that are to be shared, you need to say, right, okay, what can I assume that the person knows? I can assume that they're a developer. I can assume that they have a computer, and I can assume that they have access to the internet. So if I just say React and put a link to the React website, that might be enough to make them go, oh, right, yeah, React is JavaScript, it uses Node and NPM, and it does this, that, and the other, and it does components and all that kind of stuff. Now I can go back to the notes, and I can say, right, do I need to handhold and say this is how you build? Probably. But even if I did, it wouldn't reduce from that fact, right? I could put, right, to build, do npm run build, or similar, right? Or yarn run build, or whatever it is. But like in your notes, because you know how to build it, you don't have to put that. Right, because like you say, you've already exercised all of that knowledge, and you've already gotten that experience. And I find, now this is, everybody's going to be different, right? I find that stopping and physically writing with a pen and a paper is how I do best with note taking, because I'm having to stop. I'm having to convert that knowledge into a mechanical movement of my wrist, or my fingers or whatever, to actually manipulate the pen and leave those notes. But I found that I was leaving loads of bits of paper everywhere. Not good for the environment, not good for my environment. And so I went out and bought myself a tablet that I could write on. And it's one of these ones that's like e-ink tablet. You write on it, it stores it in the memory and stuff. So I've got one of those, but that may not work for you. Get a pen and a paper, right? I remember my mum just as a side note, right? We're talking about memory, we're talking about learning, we're talking about taking notes. My mum has a terrible time remembering any of her passwords. And so I said, right, I leapt straight in with, like, let's solve this with technology. Let's go with a password manager. Let's get you signed up for LastPass. And she forgot to use it. And so I was like, okay, right, let's take a step back. I will buy you, and it might sound funny, but I will buy you a password book. And you can go get them. You can get them on Amazon, you can get them on wherever you buy your stuff. And it is just literally an A5 notebook with the word password on the front. And you write down all your usernames and passwords. Doesn't sound that secure, but at least then she knows what they are, right? And she won't lose her accounts.
But then you say that doesn't sound too secure, as in if you're doing that in an office with lots of people and leaving sticky notes with passwords, that's not. But my mum does exactly the same. And a hacker in like another part of the planet can't hack their way into that piece of paper.
Yeah. They need physical access to the piece of paper, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you've kind of got MFA a bit kind of ish there.
Yeah, you need to know where the book is. You need to know what page it's on. That's 2 factors.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, I need to transfer my LastPass over to some paper then.
all the security experts are now screaming at us, right?
Well, I've been trying, but I think it's difficult because I think we default to using technology. But it's like my wife, for example, I've been pestered. Every time she forgets a password, she comes over to me and I look in my own LastPass because I put her passwords in there because she can't remember them. And I've tried to get her to use LastPass, but because she's a non-technical person, she just won't. So I think it's easy for us to judge when we forget what we know because we've been doing it for so long. But I think that the average user is kind of like, this stuff isn't easy.
Yeah, I think the barrier to entry, right? You and I as technologists, as developers, as people who feel the joy about being surrounded by these things and making stuff, we don't mind that in the browser there's that little, we talk about LastPass, right? But it can apply to any other password manager that lives in the browser. LastPass, 1Password, whatever. We don't mind that there's a little icon in the corner of our window that has a number on it that tells us, there's a password for this website that I have access to. So if you need it, I can get to it. And we know that all you need to do is hover, click, type in your master key password, and it does it all for you. You don't have to worry about that. But to someone else, that's a huge leap compared to, I'll go get my password book, I'll swap to page 6, and there it is. That barrier to entry is ridiculously low, but it also, it's so easy to fall into that, and that's why I love it. That's why I suggested it to my mum, because I was like, oh, just write them down. I don't care that they're all that a bunch of them are all the same. I don't care, right? They're your passwords. That's your job to look after them. Put them in a book, put them in a drawer, keep the drawer closed, only go to that drawer when you need it. This is, listeners, don't go break into my mum's house. But you know what I mean? That barrier to entry of remembering where it is it will likely go in a drawer with all of the other notebooks that she's got for other things she needs to remember. So then she just thinks, oh, what's my password? You know what? I can't be bothered to remember it. Open the drawer. There it is. That barrier to entry is so low that she can't not do it.
Yeah, I think with the barrier to entry thing as well, it's not just non-developers. It's important to remember that developers have a wide range of knowledge, and we kind of probably forget we've both been developing for a very long time, so just naturally have different experience. But then I think we actively learn quite a lot. So in teams, you've got junior programmers, people less experienced. I think it's also important to remember the same concepts, that not everyone has the same experience, and just be kind to each other. It's like, just don't if someone doesn't have the same background as you, that doesn't mean that you can get stressed at them and start telling them off or anything. And help them get better, and just be kind to people. I think that's so important.
Yeah, I always if I've assumed a certain amount of knowledge and I'm trying to help someone, I don't, and it'll. For those who know about the topic that we're talking about, they will probably find it offensive. But I say, hey, are you aware of this thing, right? Let's say I'm trying to help someone with some C#, right? We're talking to the database, we've pulled some data out, we're iterating over that list, or maybe we're building a queryable. I'd be like, okay, do you know much about entity framework? No? Okay, that's fine. Well, let's try and plug those holes whilst we're here. Do you know much about how to query something, with a queryable? Okay, that's fine. Do you know why we use a queryable rather than an enumerable when we're pulling things out of the database? Okay, that's fine. No, that's not a problem. Let's talk about this. Fill those gaps. Rather than saying, but you should know this. You're blah, 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 blah. Don't you know this? I know this, so you should know this. No, they don't. When I went to university, the first 6 months or the first semester or whatever was all, and it's going to sound stupid, but this is a computer, right? And this is how you plug one in, and this is how you put. It wasn't for the whole semester, but like the first couple of days were okay. This is what a computer currently looks like. You may have a laptop, you may have a tablet, you may have this, that, and the other, and this is how you sort of plug it all together. This is what an operating system is. This is Windows icons, menus, and pointers. And they were saying that because to get onto the course, you just had to have a certain amount of knowledge, right? You just had to have maybe the A levels, maybe the GCSE levels, maybe the international equivalents of them, but you don't have to have access to computers to be able to do your A levels or your GCSEs or your BTECs or whatever, right? You don't have to have access to computers to do that. So they were saying we're assuming no knowledge, building you up from there, rather than saying, right, okay, you all know what a compiler is, you all know what a function is, we're going to jump straight into monads because, oh yeah, also this is day one, right? They're not going to do that because then that barrier to entry is like staring at a mountain, right?
Exactly, and everyone has different backgrounds. It's like when you're first starting getting into the education when you're younger, it's kind of, some people, like I've been fortunate that my dad used to bring home like BBCs and VIC-20s and things, so I could tinker from a young age. But not everyone like has that, and like just everyone has completely different backgrounds. Like different households, some households might be able to have lots of computers, some houses might not be able to afford any computers. So when you're teaching people, it's important to remember that not everyone has the same background.
Absolutely. So we talked a lot about teaching and learning so far, and that is a part of productivity because, like you say, it's related, right? You got to be able to take notes. You got to be able to feed back to yourself. I think I would say that maybe one of the things that I do, and this not everyone has to do this, is because I'm taking notes. I'm taking them electronically, or I'm taking them with bits of paper. What I do is on a Friday afternoon after I finish work, I'll look back at my notes and go, right, what did I actually do today? We joked before we hit record about, wait, you can remember that? I can't even remember yesterday, right? And I can't remember yesterday. But if I look at my notes, I know what I did yesterday, right?
I'm just laughing now at, so for the listeners, the context of that conversation was I made a Red Dwarf reference, and Jamie started like quoting out lots, word for word perfect, lots of Red Dwarf quotes. So I'm interested, you were taking notes on Red Dwarf?
No, well, like I said, it's because I'm auditory learner, right? So because I'm hearing it, it's going straight in.
Yeah, I'm terrible with quotes.
But also there's we talked about earlier, there's the emotion involved, right? When we hear those lines, it affects us in some way, right? And I could do the same with lines that I've read in a book. For instance, one of my favorite books is Night Watch by Terry Pratchett. It's part of the Discworld series of books, the 41 books. I think it was book number 30, 31, 32, something like that. In my opinion, best book in the series. I can sit with my brother because he's read the same book. We feel exactly the same way about there's a couple of years between us, and I can just say a line, and we're on page 37, we're on page 42, we're on whatever, because I think that Pratchett was a really good writer. Everybody has opinions on that. But it's because of the emotions that are involved in that section of the book. You just jump straight back into it because you're tapping into those emotions. And so if you're teaching or you're learning, using emotions is, like we said earlier on, a fantastic way to actually get that information across. I've been in lectures or in training sessions where someone does the teacher from Ferris Bueller, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that, and you don't take anything in. Or maybe you take something in because you start laughing at, oh, this is hilarious, how monotonous this is. We've also been in talks and speeches and stuff that start with a magic trick that's got nothing to do with what you're doing, but you remember the magic trick. Or straight out of uni, I took teacher training, and I gave a couple of lessons, and then I said to the kids, right, I want you all to take 20 minutes out of this lesson and draw a poster. You can sit in teams if you want. Use the knowledge you've just learned over the last 2 or 3 lessons, over the last week or so. Come up with a poster and talk to me in the class about what you've done. And a lot of people, because they weren't used to it, they got up and they did the monotonous thing. They've read the posters. That's fine. Whatever works for you. And this one kid, Harley, I will always remember it. He got up and stuck his poster on the wall, and they walked out the room. And I'm like, where are you going? What's going on? And then he came running back in the room and did a forward flip and landed and went, right, okay, so now we're going to talk about Pythagoras. And I'm like, that's amazing. You've got it. You have got it. Because then everyone in the room remembers the day that Harley came running into the class and did a forward flip and then started talking about Pythagoras. Right? They will just remember that forever.
Yeah, it reminds me, a few years ago, there was a talk I saw. Well, when I say saw, it was online. But I think Donovan Brown, he was talking about DevOps. And at the start of it, he set a scenario where he basically had a counter on the screen, which was how much money you're losing. And basically, he was describing a bug that got introduced into a system that needed to be fixed. And at the very start of the talk, he set the scenario, the timer started, and the amount of money on this digital display was just shooting up into the millions within seconds. Mm-hmm. And so he really, as part of his talk, he really added a lot of emotion and fear, and people could picture they were in that scenario. And that was years ago, and I just remember that talk. So just adding that just makes such a big difference.
Absolutely.
I'll try and dig it up for the show notes.
Oh, thank you very much. That'd be awesome. But yeah, adding any kind of emotion, positive, negative, whatever, it really, really does help. But we've talked about the learning and the teaching aspect, because it is important to be learning, right? Like you said, as part of your productivity thing, you need to be always learning something new, but not a huge amount. Just like, at the time of recording, they've just ratified the C# 11 !! null check stuff, right? I know that is a thing. I don't know everything there is to know about it, but I know that it exists. I know that in the next version of C# you're going to be able to put 2 exclamation marks, or as some people might say, a double bang, and it will do a null check for you without having to do object equals null or whatever. That's kind of useful. It's syntactic sugar. You don't have to do it, but I know that it exists. That's my learning for the day done. Right? That's it. That's all I need to learn. Just that one thing, and I'm done.
It's just something every day. And even if you dedicate half an hour each day, half an hour is not a long amount of time. You spend that just chatting or going to get a coffee or something or whatever. But if you work it out over a year, that's like the equivalent to spending over a month of study time, 7.5 hours a day. Mm-hmm. Now, just half an hour a day. So it kind of adds up. So imagine this time next year, how much more you would know if you had committed half an hour versus not committing that half an hour. And I think this is actually one of my current clients just came up in conversation recently, where the team actively want to do more learning because we're starting to use new technology, and the dev manager is really, really good. He's really proactive. He wants everyone to spend time learning. But then a lot of the team are finding that because so much business as usual work is coming in, they're finding that, okay, all this stuff came in, so I don't have time to learning. I want to do it, but I just don't have time for it. And I'm really trying to stress that rather than you've got all business as usual stuff and trying to fit your learning around it, do it the other way around. So pay yourself first, block out half an hour, and then fit everything else around that. Otherwise, you're just not going to do it. It's just not going to happen.
Absolutely. I'm a big proponent of lunch and learns. That's everyone brings their lunch into a room. Somebody sits down and goes, right, okay, there's this thing. You could do the Elvis operator, right? Exclamation mark, question mark, or question mark, exclamation, whichever way around it is, right? Exclamation, question mark, dot, or whatever, right? I'm going to tell you about that in C# and see so that you understand what it is. And that way, you don't have to come to me and say, this, what is this? And then I'm going to say, where we should use it, not just that it exists. Here's an example of a real code base, a real piece of code that I've written, and I think it fits really well here. Let's discuss that, right? Because then not only are you're in a relaxed atmosphere because you're all eating and you're all having a great time, you're learning about this new thing, and you're also discussing as a team, should we even use this, right? And if we should, do we use it everywhere? Like, do I make it a pull request rule now that you use the Elvis operator everywhere? Or do I make it a thing where if it fits, use it? There's this sort of amorphous thing, but we'll have a discussion as a culture of developers, not as the wider company culture, but as the culture of developers, maybe the culture of developers on this team. Let's have a discussion about, do we use it? Why do we use it? When do we not use it? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess to play a bit of devil's advocate to that lunch and learn thing, I think it's important that companies appreciate that learning should be part of, included in working hours, and account for that. So I guess I always feel a bit funny about lunch and learns because it's kind of expecting staff to spend their break doing this thing that you might not want to do. And if the rest of the team are doing it, you kind of feel compulsed to do it, when actually you might just want to go out for a walk or have a break and stuff. So I would certainly say, like, if there's any development managers listening or people that are in a position to make this call, allow time for your staff to do learning within working hours. It shouldn't be expected that people spend their lunch or even learn in their own time. It's part of the job, and it's so important that it's not just going to help them, it's going to help the business.
This episode of the .NET Core podcast is brought to you in part by Mailtrap.io. Tired of creating dummy Gmail accounts to test your messages? With Mailtrap, you can see what the message looks like for the recipients without having to send it. Set up Mailtrap in less than 5 minutes to test your emails and share results with team members. See all crucial email reports right in your inbox. Get the list of errors with a reference to the line of code that requires fixes with HTML and CSS validation. As well as this, Mailtrap also makes BCC testing easier. Plus, Mailtrap recently released transactional email sending, so you can send emails and monitor their performance. It's easy to check all of the necessary statistics, including spam complaints, open and bounce rates, and mailbox provider data. And you get a user-friendly interface with color-coded data and no extra buttons to help use the app even more efficiently. Get started for free at Mailtrap.io by following the link in the description and complete the email development cycle. Test and send your emails within one solution. That's Mailtrap.io. Mailtrap.io. But yeah, I agree. And maybe setting aside half an hour every week, half an hour every 2 weeks to allow someone to go, can I just shout up and, if anyone's interested, I'm going to be talking about this thing for the next half an hour. Let's go into the boardroom, let's go into this room, let's book a room and have time, or maybe just everyone crowd around my machine. I'm assuming that we're all back into the office or whatever, or maybe I'll throw together a room in Slack or Zoom or Teams or whatever it is you're using. If folks are interested, I'm going to be talking about this thing, and then we can have an open discussion about what is this, how do we use it, do we use it, is it pointless, is there a point to it, and sharing that knowledge. Or indeed, I'm going to go learn about React, about this library for React, and then when I'm done, I'm happy to do like a screen share and show you what I've learned and show you what I've built, and then just leave it at that, right? Because that like half an hour of just sharing that information might be enough to spark the inspiration of someone else. Oh, that's a really cool control. I was hard coding all of this for ages, but now that I know that there is a library that does it for me, right?
Exactly. And that's part of, like, as you learn more stuff and you get to know what's out there, you do less reinventing the wheel. And that's one thing with the whole learning thing that I really like about podcasts for learning is it's important to, even if you don't know all this stuff deeply, to have a broad range of knowledge over when you come to solve a problem, what tools can I reach for? And I find being an avid listener of podcasts, that's given me a really wide, broad range of shallow knowledge. And then I know what I want to then focus deeply on, read a book, watch a Pluralsight course on. And it just means that I've kind of heard about all these different things and kind of know what they do, even if I don't know how to implement them. And I think that makes a big difference. But with the whole learning thing, it's kind of, I suppose the next big question here is like, what do you learn? As in, there is so much to learn. And I guess my suggestion here would be to start with what you actually use. So it's kind of, I think knowing your own tech stack is so important. So like if you're a React developer, make sure you really grok React, or if you're an ASP.NET developer, make sure you really grok that. Because then when you're building stuff, from a productivity point of view, you can focus on the business requirement rather than how do I do X and Y in my chosen tech stack. And if you know, for example, React back to front, then you can knock out a React app way quicker than someone that's mediocre and hasn't spent time really understanding how everything fits together. And that applies to any technology, not just React. So I would start, like, I know there's lots of new shiny stuff to learn, but I would start making sure that first you know your own tech stack, your own tooling, and you can be super productive in that, and then start branching off to other stuff. And as you learn more stuff, you'll start to learn more stuff that you want to learn, because you start hearing about different things. And yeah. I'm kind of aware that if you said that your last episode, the last episode that you will have published, a bit of a time shift going on and you've not published it yet, is about learning. Is it worth not moving on from learning? Because I don't want to repeat too much of...
Totally, yeah. I just want to sort of echo what you've said and say that I think it also, if you have that deep knowledge of a thing, you can then be making informed decisions as you're working through it. You can say, right, okay, we're not going to use this particular thing. Or also, let's say that you have deep knowledge of React and you know a bunch of different ways to do the same thing. You could say, well, I vote we go with X rather than Y, because, you know, I can see maybe in the future we may be needing to use X. Or indeed, you can say, I say that we don't use X because we're not in the future yet, but you're able to make that informed decision. Rather than just going npm install some library and hoping for the best, you can actually make that decision and say, right, okay, this isn't going to work because maybe the library's out of date, maybe the developer has moved on to other things, maybe it's just not good. But yeah, I agree. So in that aspect, then, I guess not just the technology that you're using, but I guess the technology around the technology that you're using, the technology that supports it, right? Like IDEs, tool chains, build tools, things like that. That must be quite important too, right?
Oh, absolutely. And even taking a step back before we talk about IDs and leveraging the IDs, which is quite a big important one, it makes quite a big difference. And if we just look at raw typing speed, like, are you a fast typer? Are you a slow typer? If you're a slow typer, it's going to take you longer to write code. And it's not just coding, it's things like communications, like emails, Teams, Slack, especially now a lot of us are remote. Being a slow typer can really slow you down. Now, obviously, you can be typing fast in the wrong direction and building the wrong thing, but we can talk about that separately. But I would just say if you're a slow typer, it's probably worth spending a bit of time learning to touch type, just basically a bit of practice time to get a bit faster, because it's all about how fast you can interact with a computer as well. So as you mentioned about leveraging your IDE and knowing that quite often when coding, I'm a big, massive keyboard shortcut fan. Like, basically, I want to get the IDE to do as much as possible. So refactoring, all this kind of stuff, inserting snippets, inserting code stuff. Because I want to type I'm lazy, I want to type as little as possible. But quite often I would see other developers, and this is if I think about how I used to be, where I would do lots of things manually, even like taking a simple example like renaming stuff where in ReSharper or probably Visual Studio or Rider, Control RR, you can just rename and it'll intelligently do that, or change signatures. If you do that manually, that's going to take you 10 times as long, probably more, as in the ID can do a lot for you. And that's a simple example. There's lots of really advanced use cases that the ID can just do for you out of the box. So it's learning your tooling. And it's quite interesting. I'm quite curious. Can I ask you a quick question? When you hear the term 10x developer, what do you think of?
If I'm honest, right, hand on heart, I hate the phrase. Because 10x when compared to what, right? You can't say 10x when you haven't described what a 1x is, right? But I think,
Exactly.
yeah, I think that it's used by people to sort of say, I'm better than you, and here's why, right? And in a team, you don't want a superstar. You want a bunch of people who are all sort of working together, right? And so if I was working in a team with someone who was a self-proclaimed 10x developer, I would try and avoid them as much as possible, right?
Exactly. But I think my thoughts here is that suggests a linear sliding scale of, and it's like you're somewhere on that scale where, as we've kind of already covered, and we can cover much more stuff, we've spoken about typing speed, leveraging the ID, we've spoken about, we can speak about whether you're writing you're building the right thing and you're writing maintainable, testable code, automated, whether you're automating stuff, whether you're like, if I'm probably quite productive in .NET, but if I was thrown in front of a Go or Rust application, I'd be very unproductive. So it is just, there isn't this linear sliding scale. There's all these different facets to productivity that we're talking about, and they all come together. And as a whole, that is what I define productivity as, not a single sliding thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the yeah, it doesn't work like that, right? You can't become a 9x developer then become an 8x developer, right? Or maybe you can. Ignoring the fact that it isn't a sliding scale, you could become really productive in one section of your practice, your engineering, whatever you want to call it. But then that could have a detrimental effect on your ability to do something else, right? They don't all grow at the same time, is what I'm saying. The skills don't. It's kind of like working out, right? If you go and you lift lots of heavy things, do loads of bicep curls, it's not necessarily going to make your legs stronger, right? And so if you spend forever learning all of the myriad different shortcuts inside of all of the shortcuts inside of the IDE, not like the core 10 that you use every day, every single possible one. Or didn't you know that if you do Control Shift P X Z and push the power button on your computer, it will do this for you? Well, I'm not a contortionist, so I'm not going to do that, right? But learning all of that, it's like there's an XKCD comic about the Balmer curve where like you start being really productive and then it just drops off straight away, right? Because I'm not going to go into why, right? We'll not talk about Steve Ballmer and why that exists, but like you get to that point and then it all drops off. Like if you push yourself further, you'll stop being productive. And I think this idea of constantly pushing for, I need to be the best, everything needs to be going at that linear scale. You then get to a point where something else is like, that you're getting detrimental in something else because of it, right? But that's my thought, right?
I completely agree. It's kind of it's not linear. But what I would say towards that though is the whole one. When I have heard in podcasts and blog posts mentioned about the 10x developer, I've heard lots of things saying, does this even exist? And I would argue the fact that even just if we look at two of those facets we had were typing speed and leveraging the ID, so you're automating a lot of the stuff the ID has. You could you could already see a factor of 10 between the speeds there, and that doesn't take into account of your knowledge. Are you building the right thing? Are you writing maintainable, testable code? Are you using the right tools? Are you writing like tests and things? All these kind of extra stuff that comes along with it. So I would say that if you did want to put it on a scale, then I've never understood the doubt that there is that 10x way, way higher difference. If you aim to be more productive, you can be. And I think this goes to the whole point of, at the very start, we said that if you're producing more value and output by working longer days, there's a ceiling there. But by working smarter, then it's kind of, the ceiling goes away. There's just so many ways that you can produce more value in less time. And it's just that comes just over time with learning and stuff, but also being intentional about it. Have I spent, and this is another topic we can talk about, focus. Have I spent a lot of today procrastinating? Like, have I been on Twitter too much or Reddit or whatever it is? Or have I just been in meetings that I don't need to be in and lots of things? And a lot of the time it's kind of like just realizing that time, you don't get time back that you spend, and making good value of it, making good use of it.
Like you say, it's entirely possible to just sit and spin your wheels, right? You're going nowhere fast. And, how do I bring this example in? Let's say you're integrating with some kind of third-party system, right? A lot of us do that. We take some code, we talk to a third-party system, we take the response, we do something with it and push it back, right? Let's say you're integrating with a third-party system, and they have an API that you can use. And then you decide, this API is no good. I'm going to write my own. Why?
Yeah.
What could you possibly achieve that the team at the other company has already achieved? right? And you're wasting, unless of course you have a very, very specific reason for, I need to write my own version of this because it solves some business process, right? I've said it multiple times, and I've said it on Tabs and Spaces as well. The boss doesn't care how you did it, just that you did it. The boss cares that when you push the button, it gives them money. That is all they care about. That is it. It doesn't matter, I used a monad and we hacked into this system and we did this, that, and the other. They don't care. They're talking, you're talking, they're hearing static until they hear, and when you push the button, it gives you money. That's when they are paying attention, because they don't care about the technical details. And so and here comes the body quotes, if all you do is hook a bunch of libraries together, well, guess what? You are still the cement that holds those libraries together. You have achieved something by connecting all of those Lego bricks, those bricks, or whatever you want to call them. And so if you can do that and still produce the thing that the boss wants, that the project manager wants, that the client, the customer, the user, whatever wants, guess what? You've become 1,000,000% more productive than someone who's gone, okay, so first thing I'm going to do hash include stdio, and then I'm going to create a namespace. Then I'm going to, because they're still typing, and you've already handed the work in. You're going home. Who's more productive?
Exactly. Less is more, and all that. But it seems like you hit on a good point, and about building your own versus using something that's already bulletproofed and tried and tested by lots of people. I've seen lots of companies try, we must write our own CMS because our use case is different than anyone else's, or we must build our own CI/CD system or customize it so much that we can't upgrade the CI/CD system and whatever, because we're special snowflakes that we build software differently than anyone else. When in reality, most software teams do exactly the same things. So use the tooling that's already out there. And nowadays, we're really lucky because a lot of this stuff is pretty much free, which it's amazing how much you can get for free. And it does all this stuff for you, which how much time would you spend building and maintaining if you try to do it yourself? And it's not been battle tested.
Mm-hmm. It is literally someone else's job to build the thing that you are using, right? You wouldn't go to an engineering firm or a car maintenance firm and they go, yeah, well, we've got these jacks to lift the cars up and they're great because they're from whichever company, but they're really expensive, so we've built our own and we're going to test it with your car, right? You wouldn't do that because you know that as soon as your car goes on it and it starts going up, it'll get to the top and then it'll come crashing down, or it'll fling it out of the roof, right? Your car is then at risk of being destroyed because they've decided they wanted to build their own tools. So I don't understand why most of the time we don't trust the people who are, because it's a matter of trust. It's nothing else. You can look as deep as you want and come up with as many excuses as you want. It's trust. The developers who decide to write their own don't trust that the people on the other side have done as good a job as they think they can do. And I say think they can do, I'm not trying to be offensive or anything. So when it comes to things like CI/CD or build tools or things like that, no, I'll write my own makefile because I know better than the other members of the team who've done their own make files, or I'll make my own build system because I know better, and you may know better. But does knowing better, does proving that you know better, make the software ship faster? Does proving that you know better get the money into the company's coffers faster? No. Do the thing that makes the money first. Then, if you have the time, show me how clever you are. But all I care about is that you can get me the money. Go do the thing, build the thing, and then when it starts making money, I'll be happy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's not just that they think they can do better. I think it's more developers enjoy coding. And developers think about, I want to play around with this thing and do this. And I think it's important that developers actually also think about the business and what the business actually wants and value, rather than I'm going to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of, it's one of those things, isn't it? It's kind of, and again, it comes back to learning and knowing what's out there. So it might be that you just didn't know that thing existed in the first place. It's like, for example, if I think back many, many years, there was a company, before I was consulting, this was a permanent job, where we quite heavily used SQL Server. So I spent a lot of time in SQL Server Management Studio writing SQL queries. And so I'd be writing lots of join statements to query the database, and we'd be doing that all the time. And at the time, I'd heard of LinkPad, but I didn't really use it that much. Now I'm a huge fan of LinkPad, and this is just an example of where tooling can help. In LinkPad, if it was an order database or something, I could type orders, press F5. In the dump window in LinkPad, you get the table output. But for foreign key references, you get a hyperlink, which opens a nested table with that related table. Basically, it's all linked in, and you can click, drill down the foreign key references, and you can just view the data within, and all you did is type one word and press F5. And there's little things like that where, as you get to learn different tools and faster ways of doing things, that just makes a big difference to productivity. But you don't know what you don't know until you know it.
Exactly, right. Exactly. And that's where knowledge sharing comes in, right? Because if you're not sharing that knowledge, there is absolutely no way that the other developers around you are going to be able to benefit from your experience. They're not going to know, Dan has this software that he runs on his computer. I don't even know what it's called. I've looked over and I've seen him type in orders and then hit F5, and there's tables and tables and tables of data, and he just clicks. I don't know. Do you know what? I'm going to go ask him, right? Because I think that would be a great tool. Or, you come over and you go, oh my goodness, right, I can see you're writing this really long statement in SQL Server. Did you know about LinkPad? Because this is all, come have a look. And then you show them and you're like, look, see, I click, done. Oh, wow, how much is that? It's free. Really? Yeah. Oh my goodness. And, you've just changed someone's life there by sharing that knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also I think it's quite easy for some developers, especially maybe not for us being consultants, because part of our job is to mentor and help the team learn, because we don't want clients to be dependent on us, because then we'll need to be there for years upon years. But for a permanent member of staff, I think some people might find comfort in not sharing knowledge and hoarding it so that they become the go-to person, and no one else can touch. I've got ownership over this. No one's allowed to touch it. The problem with that is kind of the team can't grow, and you end up with this silo, which people are scared to touch that code. That person's got information, and whilst they might think it's giving them security, actually a member of staff that really helps the team grow is way more valuable to the company. You're not going to lose your job because more people know your stuff, but you're going to keep your job because the team see the value, they see that the stuff you're doing is helping the entire team grow, helping the entire team learn. And also, when you're explaining something to someone else, they might say, oh yeah, do you know you can do this as well? And then you might learn something as well. So it's a two-way thing. And the more you do, I find that the more I do go into a company and do help out mentoring and teaching, the more other people start doing the same. because it becomes more, and the whole team has a bit of a mindset shift, and everyone starts talking more, being more open, and it's amazing to see a team grow like that. But also, it's a two-way learning thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a team. I'm cautious about bringing this story up, just because I have to talk about something called the bus factor. And if you haven't heard of the bus factor, it's a rather sterile engineering term for how many developers, how many engineers, how many people within your team know about something. The lower the bus factor, the worse you are off. I worked on a project very recently, let's say within the last 2 years, where they had a bus factor of 1. That meant one member of staff knew everything. They had all of the keys to the castle. That member of staff then was involved in an accident, and all development stopped. All development stopped. Thankfully, that person is fine. That person recovered and is doing very well. But everything stopped for 3 months. Because they had the keys to the castle. They had all of the knowledge. Anytime anyone needed to work on something, they had to go to them and say, where is the code? Which function am I overwriting? How do I build it? How do I deploy it? Oh, you do it this way, but don't tell anyone. Don't document it. It's fine. Well, I mean, you know, you've got a team of 200 plus developers around you, and you're surrounding that person, and that person holds all the keys to the castle. Something happens, everything stops. The company could have then shut down, but what they ended up having to do was bringing the person in whilst they were recovering and saying, right, where do we go? How do we do this? And it was ridiculous, because like I see myself as a bit of a humanist. I'm like, let the person heal, let the person rest, let them come back when they're ready. Don't force them back, because that's just going to, like you were saying, right? If you're working 15-hour days, guess what? You're eventually going to crash, right? I hate to use that term, but you're going to get to a point where you're too tired, it's too difficult for you to work. Something's got to give, right? And with this person, if they're healing, you're going to make their healing process last longer. Thankfully, that person's okay. But yeah, when you have that one person, that sort of linchpin for the whole company, the whole team, and they know everything, and then they disappear for whatever reason, you then have to have the hard conversation of, right, what do we actually do? Can we deliver this project? Because I don't think we can. And we actually had to have that conversation. And that is a scary prospect, because then people who are on the team, who are maybe full-time employees, go, is my job safe if this person isn't around?
Yeah, definitely.
When you are indispensable, you are literally indispensable.
And I think that the term you use, bus factor, and also your example, suggests an accident or something negative. But it applies to so many different things. Someone going on holiday, but people have to have holidays. Someone might want to leave the company, as in not for a negative reason, but as in people don't stay at companies anymore for all their lives. Also, as an individual, if you, as I mentioned before, if you're hoarding information because you want to feel more stable, and you do become that single point of all the knowledge, then you might want to move on. There might be you might get an amazing opportunity, but then you might feel, oh, actually, I can't move on because I'll be screwing this company.
Mm-hmm.
So
some companies won't let you move on because you have all of the keys to the castle.
Yeah.
You know? Like I said, when you are indispensable, you are indispensable. Maybe a life event happens. Could be a joyous life event, could be a sad life event. A life event happens, you need to step away from work. You can't, because they need you, because you are now the source of truth, the silo of knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess another section for this productivity, another facet, is we've spoken a bit about focus and being distracted. Then it's kind of, how do you become more focused if you are someone that gets easily distracted? And I think we hinted a bit about this before we started recording, is the fact that you're an auditory learner, so you have your headphones. I think we had started recording because you said you'd share your playlist, and I find that it's just a silly thing, and this is obviously everyone's different, but you can see I've got quite big headphones on. By having headphones that cover my ear, I find night and day difference between my productivity level. I'm so much more focused when I'm wearing headphones. I don't really have a specific music genre which I'm more productive with. It really depends on my mood, but it's more knowing the mood. But I don't know, there's something all encompassing which kind of like just blocks out everything else and helps me focus. But then there's other things like, I know it's quite well known, but the Pomodoro technique, where for those that don't know, this is kind of setting a timer for 25 minutes. You can only focus on that one thing, the task you're working on, nothing else. You can't check emails, you can't do anything. And then when the timer goes off, you set it for 5 minutes and you can have a break. And this kind of like ties into the learning thing as well. If you're setting that for learning, then you need a break so your brain can start to make sense of what you've learned. Otherwise, if you just cram, then you're not going to take all of that in. So you need those breaks anyway. But on one thing, so I've tried Pomodoro technique quite a few times, and the thing that always puts me off about it that I don't like is quite often I am in the zone when that timer goes off at 25 minutes, and at the time I didn't want to be pulled out of it. I know all the good things about that, you need a break and everything, but sometimes that's quite a harsh. You're being pulled out of the zone when you're not ready. And also, like, if you're unmotivated, which is the reason I would want to use the Pomodoro technique, then 25 minutes, it's not a long time, but it feels like a long time. And quite often, a lot of it is just getting started. It's like if you're working on something that's maybe you don't really want to start, it's just that getting started. So what I found works for me now is setting a 10-minute timer. So it's much shorter. It's just enough to get started and get into the zone. Do not have an alert going off. Do not have the timer in front of you. Put it somewhere else. But if you feel yourself being pulled over to an email, you can look at the timer am I still in that 10 minutes? But quite often when it gets to the 10 minutes, then I'm in the zone at that point and I don't want to stop. And next time I know it, like half an hour, whatever has gone by, and I produce loads of work. But I really don't I like the idea of the Pomodoro technique, but I don't like that hard alarm going off, pull you out of the zone thing. I don't know. Have you tried the Pomodoro technique before?
Yeah, like you're saying, it can be quite jarring. But what I do is I have 25-minute, half an hour stints where everything other than what I'm using is closed. I don't have Teams, Slack, Discord, whatever, browsers, nothing. Nothing's open. And it's a bit draconian, but it's like I'm using this IDE, I'm looking at this code, I'm doing this. If I need the browser to debug what I'm doing, the browser gets opened, but I stay in that tab, right? It's really strict, but it's like it's almost like I've got, the blinkers they put on a horse,
yes,
so they can only see in front of them. That's what I'm looking at. That's what I'm doing. Because otherwise, I've got a multi-monitor setup. If I'm looking at monitor 1 and on monitor 2, someone's sending me a message. Hey, Jamie, can you check this? Hey, Jamie, here's a silly cat picture. Hey, Jamie, look at. I'm going to go, and my head's going to slowly turn. So I get rid of all distractions, which is really draconian, really sort of, it is hard to do because, like, the very first time I did it, I'm working away and I'm starting to get fatigued, and my hand went straight to the mouse. I know what I'm doing because it's me who's doing it, right? But it must have been subconscious. And my mouse pointer hovered over Slack, and it's like I'm going to double click. I may have a message from the client. I may just need to check. And it was like I'm looking at the screen. I'm like, no, because whatever it is that they want me for, it's not as important as what I'm doing for them right now.
Exactly.
The client, customer, user, whatever.
It's not going away. It's still there as well. I think with the whole, like, I don't know about you, but I've got a multi-monitor setup. And if you, like you say, if you're just focusing on Visual Studio or Ride or whatever your idea is, you can even turn off the other monitors to block them out. One thing I use quite a lot is virtual desktops. So I generally have what I'm working on one virtual desktop, which covers all 3 screens, because quite often I do have, as you say, the browser using things like hot reload and stuff, so I'm coding and I can see it changing. And then I've got things related to what I'm doing in that virtual desktop, but then everything else is in other virtual desktops. So it's the whole out of sight, out of mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think
absolutely.
That does make a big difference.
No, it does. It does, because if you can't see it, then you can't interact with it, right? And that's the biggest thing, right? All modern operating systems do this. When an app wants your attention, it flashes. or it bounces, or it does something. It's like, hey, check me out, check me out, check me out, check me out, and it keeps doing it until you go check it out. And so you go, so naturally you go and look. Oh, it's just it's a message from Jamie. He's just saying, how are you? Okay, whatever. But the problem is that just like a computer, right? I've used this example earlier on. Let's pretend that your brain is a computer. You've got the task you're running on is running on one of your CPU cores. And in order to switch tasks, you literally context switch. You take all of that working memory, dump it out to long-term memory, and then, because, for folks who don't really know how multi-threading, not multi-threading, multitasking works in a computer, when an application is running, it's only ever running for a specific, very small slice of time. After that slice of time, everything in the CPU and the cache and the memory gets dumped to disk. Another task jumps in, sets itself up, starts running, and then that time slice is over. It then swaps back. And swapping back to and from takes a number of cycles. And taking all of that working memory, you've got the database, you've got the user interface, you've got which line of code you're in, which file you're in, the entire stack of how I got there, the tests perhaps, all of this extra information and like the bug report and all this information is then in your working memory. Or maybe it's in your short-term memory or somewhere. To move to Slack to see that Dan has sent me a picture of a silly cat, whilst it is nice, I have to ditch all of that memory somewhere. And then when I come back, I have to put all of that memory back. And for me, that is an act that is physically painful. It gives me a headache doing that. And so I make a point of going, nope, it's not even running. It's not on the screen. I can't see it. If I can't see it, I can't interact with it. And that's how I deal with it.
Exactly. And even if you've got the willpower to see that notification and ignore it, even if you don't go to it, the fact that something has distracted you and you've had to pull on that willpower to not go and look at it, that's a distraction in itself. So as you say, just closing the thing down or having it somewhere where you just won't see it, put your phone on silent, then it just makes a big difference.
Absolutely. I found that since I started working my current workspace, what I do is I put my phone on silent and put it in another room. My headphones are paired to it, so if a phone call comes through, I can answer the phone call if I want to. But it's in another room. All of my messages and stuff come through on a separate screen. So I've got WhatsApp, I've got text messages, I've got all that echoing on another screen if I want it. So if I need to send a message, if I need to see if I've got a message, I can do that. But my phone's in another room, because otherwise I found that I was going, and for the listeners, I'm holding my hands up as if I've got a phone in my hand and pushing my thumbs into my fingers as if I'm tapping the screen. All right, I'm done with this act now. I'm done with this piece of code. Just going to do this, put that down. You know what? This is too hard. I'll just get my phone and do it again. Right? And it's literally removed. I can't see it. I can't interact with it. The only things I have around me are my computers and the drinks that I'm drinking and the microphone and the headphones. All right, the only things, right? But it's the stuff that I need to do the job. And I think that's rather important.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess looking at another area, which I find makes a big difference, is just the act of breaking things down. And even before starting coding or anything, if you're working on a user story or feature or something, and again, going back to these bullet pointed lists, I tend to open up a new note and I would create bullet pointed lists, high level of the areas I need to work on. Is it like the front end, the API, the database changes, whatever? Then I would break each of those down, and just in the same way as with notes, I would break them down into nested or indented bullet points. And then I've got a checklist of things to work on. There was a book I read many years ago. I'm blanking on it. I'll remember it in a sec. But basically, Productivity Ninja, I think it was. It's got a bit of a funny name. But one of the concepts he talks about is separating out your brain into manager mode and worker mode. And so if you separate out those two different roles, so when you're starting work, you're planning, you're writing this list or filling in a backlog or whatever it is. But I tend to have, again, going back to this, whether you do it in a shared area like Azure Boards or something or Jira, or whether you do it in your personal notes. I tend to do a bit of both, because I like to be more verbose in my own breakdowns. And so when you're in management mode or planning mode, then you can go and create these lists and separate out those responsibilities to actually working. So then, and again, this goes back to focus. If you've got a list of things you need to do, which are quite almost like a checklist, when you're in worker mode and you're doing those, then it's easiest to stay focused because your planning mode, which you've already done, has created this list, and you can just go tick, 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 tick on these small granular things. And I just find that makes me really productive, not miss things when I'm working on something, because it's the whole, when you're coding and you write to-dos everywhere, it's kind of that, but in a more, rather than write a to-do in the code, I would basically add it to my notes for that thing, and it becomes a check item, which I'm going through checking them all off. So it adds to my definition of done almost.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that makes a big difference. And again, it ties into just this whole note-taking umbrella, which just covers so many things, from learning to planning to breaking things down to creating code snippets, which you can copy and paste out of instead of rewriting the wheel every time. I just think note-taking is a big thing. And there's so many different tools to do it as well. It doesn't really matter. It's kind of got like OneNote, Evernote, Notion. I've started becoming a big fan of Obsidian. I don't know if you've heard of that. That's absolutely amazing. But whatever, like literally markdown files in Dropbox or whatever, as long as you've got some form of backup. But the point is that you're mentally getting stuff out of your head, and you're getting everything written down so you don't forget things. And it just means that your brain's more relaxed to do the stuff and be creative, rather than having to hold all this stuff in memory.
I agree. And it makes it immediately measurable too, because you could say I had these 15 things to do and I broke them down properly, instead of saying, right, I've got to write the system that does ERP, right? You've actually broken it down to every single possible step. Instead of it being one checkbox, it may be 400 checkboxes, but they may be 400 teeny tiny steps. You could say, right, I've achieved 398 of them, or I've achieved 200 of them. You can see how far through that task you have gotten.
I'm aware that we've been talking for quite a while and we're probably running short of time, but there's one topic I did want to fit in before we do finish, and that is the importance of health and fitness. Because it's kind of, as an industry, we sit down for like 8+ hours a day. While software development kind of promotes mental exercise, because we're coding, we're thinking, it does the absolute opposite for physical exercise. And there's plenty of evidence showing a very strong correlation between physical fitness and mental well-being. And I'm not necessarily saying go out and run a marathon, but I would just say have a break, go for a walk, try and get some form of exercise. And it's not just exercise as well, it's what you eat. So like for the brain, it's like that is quite an important organ in our line of work, or any line of work. And there's tons of info online just showing how important good nutrition plays in the functioning of the brain. As in, if you think about, if you take a plant and you feed it rubbish, it's going to be all drawn up and withered. If you feed it superfood, then it's going to be it's going to flourish. And your body and brain is the same kind of thing. And so and sleep as well. Sleep's another important one. There's a book called Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, which I would strongly recommend everyone read. And it's I used to think, sleep's such a waste of time, I could be doing stuff in this. Read this book and that completely changes. And this ties into all learning and remembering and all this kind of stuff. So just, I suppose that as a good final message, don't neglect your body, and sleep, good nutrition, and exercise, because it's so important.
Absolutely. I would second that recommendation of the book, Why We Sleep. It is so important. So important. And yeah, I don't say this about a lot of books, but that book changed my life, I have to say. I now have an 8-hour block that is uninterruptible throughout every day. And it's like, this is my sleeping space. Anything can happen outside of that, but only one or two, family things can happen inside of that. Like if somebody needs me for something, it can happen in that block. But work things don't come anywhere near it. I've got a 2-hour buffer either side, right? So I've got this 12 hours that work cannot enter into because it's part of that sleep block. And it's so important. I agree with you completely. And it is so difficult to it's easy because our jobs are very sedentary. Like you said, it's a mental exercise most of the time, whereas there isn't really a physicality to it. And the easiest way to get about this is if you have the physical ability to do it, maybe do 2 or 3 Pomodoros and go stand outside. Just stand outside, going to the door, stepping outside of the door if you have the physical ability to do it, and taking some fresh air and look at some plant life if there is plant life around you. There are psychological studies that show that if you have greenery around you, which is, listeners, I have a number of plants throughout this room, it boosts your creativity, boosts your mood, it boosts the oxygenation levels. It can really help. So I agree completely. Excellent. So with all of that being said then, Dan, and since you've dropped that wonderful piece of knowledge towards the end, what are some of the best ways for people to get in contact with you if they want to learn a bit more? I know you do a podcast called The Unhandled Exception. Can people just sort of find that by Googling it? What's the plan?
Yeah, so I suppose the best way of getting in touch with me is on Twitter. So I'm Dracan on Twitter, which is Dracan, and my DMs are open, so feel free to reach out to me. And the podcast you mentioned, that's Unhandled Exception podcast.com, but it's available on all major platforms, and that's kind of a software development biased towards .NET and Azure, but it's just general. It's kind of, whilst you wouldn't find something on PHP, for example, so because I'm a .NET developer, but it's stuff of interest to a .NET developer, really. But there's stuff like had talks on Git, Kubernetes, like other stuff as well, not just .NET. But yeah, Twitter's the best place to reach out to me. I've also, my blog, danclarke.com, has got lots of info there as well.
Excellent. Well, I'll put links to all of those things. And if you're able to find the talk that you mentioned earlier on, where they brought up the how much is your company losing right now with this bug, that would be quite interesting as well. If you can find it. If you can't, then we'll figure out another way of putting that in there. But yeah, so don't worry about taking notes of, I've got to go to this website and that website. Don't worry, it'll all be linked. You can just press the button and it'll take you straight to it. I think I may even be able to press the button from inside of the show notes and go straight to subscribe on your podcast. I'm pretty sure that's doable. So don't worry about that, folks. That's easily done. So yeah. But I guess all that's left to say, Dan, is thank you ever so much for being on the show. I've had an absolute blast, I've got to say.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure being on, and it's just been great to have like the two-way conversation. So it's not just me doing a talk on something. Like, you've obviously got quite involved, and it's been a two-way conversation, and I've really, really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Hey, no worries. Thank you very much. That was my interview with Dan Clarke. Be sure to check out the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, or to reach out via our contact page. That's .netcore.show/contact. And to come back again next time for more .NET goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.